The weight of the storms often arrive uninvited. They don't knock at the door politely or give you time to prepare. They sweep in without warning, rattling the foundations of the life you thought was steady. One day, everything seems predictable, manageable, even comfortable, and then suddenly the sky darkens, something shifts, the storm hits, and in an instant, what once felt like stability dissolves into chaos. The storm I'm speaking of isn't just about thunder, rain, or wind. It's the kind of storm that happens inside your life, the one that shakes your identity and leaves you struggling to recognize yourself in the mirror. These storms can take many forms. Maybe yours arrived when someone you trusted broke your heart, leaving you standing in the ruins of a relationship you believed would carry you into forever. Maybe it came when you lost a job, a calling, or a dream you had spent years building, only to feel as though your efforts had been wasted. Perhaps your storm was a quiet one, invisible to everyone else but loud and merciless inside your own mind. Anxiety that kept you up at night, grief that pressed on your chest every morning, or shame that convinced you that you weren't enough. What makes these storms so heavy is not just what they take away, but what they leave behind. The rubble isn't neat. It's jagged, raw, and disorienting. You look around and realize that the map you were following no longer exists. You had plans, expectations, and ideas of how life was supposed to unfold, and now they've been ripped from your hands. You try to gather the broken pieces, hoping to fit them back together, but they no longer form the picture you once knew. When I walked through my own storm, I found myself in this very place. A relationship I thought would be my anchor turned out to be my undoing. The life I had imagined suddenly dissolved, and I was left with the kind of silence that keeps you awake at night, replaying everything you wish you had done differently. I felt like I was carrying a weight that no one else could see. Friends tried to comfort me, and their words were kind, but the truth was that I felt utterly alone. There is a loneliness that comes when your storm feels like it's yours to endure, when no one else seems to understand the depth of the loss you carry. In those moments, I questioned everything. Who was I without the person I had built my life around? Who was I without the career path I thought would define me? Who was I without the version of myself that I had been so certain of? The questions were relentless, and the answers were nowhere to be found. And yet, within that suffocating weight, something surprising began to happen. The storm, though merciless, was also stripping me of illusions. It pulled away the layers of roles I had been performing, the masks I had worn to appear strong, the expectations I had inherited from others about what my life should look like. With everything shaken and scattered, I found myself standing raw and unguarded, and as terrifying as that felt, it was also startlingly honest. There's a peculiar clarity that comes when the storm leaves you with nothing to cling to. You are forced to face the question, who am I when all of this is gone? It is not a comfortable question. Most of us spend our lives avoiding it, surrounding ourselves with distractions, achievements, relationships, and busyness, so that we don't have to sit with the silence of it. But the storm doesn't allow avoidance. It demands stillness. It demands honesty. I began to realize that the weight of the storm, though crushing, was also shaping me. Just like onyx, the gemstone formed in the depths of darkness and pressure, I was being pressed into something new. Onyx doesn't form in easy conditions. It's born from intensity, from the kind of forces that could just as easily break you apart. And yet, out of that intensity comes something resilient, beautiful, and enduring. I didn't feel like that gemstone in the beginning. I felt fragile, scattered, and broken. But slowly, with each day I endured, I could feel the storm carving something deeper within me. The weight didn't disappear. It shifted. At first, it pressed me into the ground, making me feel powerless. But with time, as I began to lean into it rather than resist it, I realized it was carving away what didn't belong, the expectations that weren't truly mine, the identities I had clung to that weren't authentic, the need for control that was never real to begin with. The storm was stripping me down, not to destroy me, but to reveal me. The truth is, storms are inevitable. We don't get to choose whether they come, but we do get to choose how we move through them. Some of us fight to hold on to the old life, gripping so tightly that we exhaust ourselves. Others collapse under the weight, convinced they will never rise again. And then there are those who slowly and painfully learn to stand in the middle of the storm and let it shape them. They discover that within the chaos there is a strange kind of invitation. The invitation to see yourself not as you were, but as you are becoming. Finding light in the darkness. Darkness has a way of convincing us it is permanent. When you are in the thick of it, when grief has wrapped itself around your chest, or anxiety has woven its constant hum into your mind, it feels like there will never be a way out. The storm clouds linger, and the idea of light feels like a memory from another lifetime. People around you might tell you that time heals, that one day you will wake up and feel better, but in the quiet hours you wonder if that's really true. I used to believe that healing meant waiting for the darkness to lift. I thought there would be a day when the sun would break through, when joy would arrive like a package on the doorstep, fully wrapped and ready to be opened. But healing is not about waiting. It is about seeking, noticing, and choosing. The light doesn't appear magically when everything is fixed. It emerges in fragments while things are still messy, while you are still broken, while the storm still rages around you. The first time I noticed light in my own darkness, it startled me. I had been carrying the weight of a loss that seemed unbearable. Each morning felt like trudging through mud, and every night was filled with questions that refused to let me rest. But then, in the middle of one particularly heavy day, I found myself sitting with a cup of coffee across from a friend who didn't ask me to explain myself, didn't try to fix me, didn't fill the silence with platitudes. They just sat there, present and steady, letting me exist as I was. For a brief moment I felt seen, and that feeling was a flicker of light. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me that the darkness was not absolute. From then on, I began to notice more sparks like that. A walk in the early morning when the air was cool and damp, and the smell of rain reminded me that life was still unfolding all around me. A song on the radio that brought back a memory of laughter I thought I had lost forever. A journal entry that began as a rant but shifted into gratitude without me even realizing it. None of these moments erased the storm, but each one lit a small lantern inside me. Finding light in darkness is not about pretending the storm doesn't exist. It is not about denying the pain or forcing optimism. It is about allowing small glimpses of beauty to coexist with the struggle. Light and darkness are not enemies. They often live side by side. The more I leaned into this truth, the more I discovered that my healing was not waiting for the storm to pass, but learning to hold both grief and joy at the same time. There is a kind of defiance in choosing light. It's not a passive act. It's not simply hoping for better days. It's waking up and deciding, in whatever small way you can, to notice the good that still exists. It might mean savoring the way sunlight filters through your window when you open the blinds. It might mean allowing yourself to laugh at something silly, even if it feels strange to laugh while your heart is heavy. It might mean calling someone who reminds you that you are loved, or cooking yourself a meal that tastes like comfort. Each act is a choice, a declaration that the darkness will not be the only thing you acknowledge. At first, these sparks might feel insignificant. You may even dismiss them, telling yourself they don't matter in the face of so much pain. But those sparks matter more than you realize. They are seeds of resilience. They are proof that even in the blackest night, you are capable of experiencing something other than despair. And with time, as you gather them, they begin to weave together into a thread that leads you forward. I learned to keep my eyes open for these moments. I began writing them down, not as a forced gratitude practice, but as a way of reminding myself that light existed even when I couldn't feel it. On the hardest days, I would flip through those notes, and they became a collection of evidence that hope was still present. And the more I collected, the easier it became to believe that the light was not lost. There is something sacred about realizing that healing doesn't come all at once. It sneaks in through cracks, through laughter, through kindness, through beauty you didn't expect. You begin to see that the storm is not an endless night, but a backdrop against which even the smallest flicker can shine brighter. And as you gather these flickers, something begins to shift. The darkness doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip. The weight doesn't disappear, but it feels lighter when you have something luminous to hold on to. The gift of surrender when the storm rages and the world around you feels like it has fallen apart. Your instinct is almost always to hold on tighter. You cling to the pieces of your old life, gripping them with white-knuckled determination, as if by sheer force you could glue everything back together. You tell yourself that if you work harder, plan better, pray longer, or just push through, maybe you can restore what was lost. This is what most of us are taught, that strength means fighting, that resilience means never letting go, that control is the only way forward. But storms have a way of teaching us the opposite. They rip away the illusion that we can control everything. They remind us, sometimes brutally, that no matter how carefully we plan, life does not always follow our script. And it is in this unraveling that surrender becomes not just an option, but a gift. I used to believe surrender meant failure. To me, it sounded like giving up, like losing, like admitting I wasn't strong enough. But the truth is, surrender isn't weakness. It is the moment you realize that fighting against what you cannot change is exhausting you in ways that no battle ever should. Surrender is not defeat, it is freedom. It is the willingness to release what was never truly yours to control in the first place. In the middle of my own storm, I spent months trying to rebuild what had been shattered. I tried to repair a relationship that had already ended. I tried to pretend I still wanted a career path that no longer lit a spark in me. I fought to cling to identities and expectations that no longer fit the person I was becoming. And with every attempt, I felt myself sinking deeper into exhaustion. I would wake up each morning with a sense of dread, knowing I would spend another day pushing against walls that refused to move. It wasn't until I let go, truly let go, that I felt the first breath of peace. Letting go didn't mean I stopped caring. It didn't mean I erased the memories or numbed the pain. It meant I finally stopped trying to control the uncontrollable. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head that would never happen. I stopped torturing myself with what if and why me. I stopped forcing myself to carry a version of life that no longer existed. And in that surrender, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief. Surrender is the art of loosening your grip, of opening your hands, of trusting that you do not have to have all the answers right now. It is choosing to believe that even in uncertainty, even in endings, there is space for something new to grow. It requires faith, not necessarily in a specific outcome, but in your own capacity to survive, adapt, and transform no matter what outcome arrives. It is saying, I may not know what comes next, but I know I can walk through it. The practice of surrender doesn't happen overnight. It's not a single dramatic moment where you release everything and never look back. It's a process, one that unfolds in small, quiet ways. Sometimes surrender looks like pausing long enough to admit, I don't have control over this, and that's okay. Sometimes it looks like handing your pain over in prayer or writing it down in a journal so you no longer have to carry it solely in your heart. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to send the text, not to chase the closure, not to force the story to have an ending you've written in your head. What surprised me most about surrender was the way it created space. Space for breath, space for clarity, space for grace. When I finally stopped clinging to the broken pieces of my past, my hands were free to receive something new. When I stopped obsessing over the things I couldn't change, I suddenly noticed the opportunities I had been blind to before. Surrender didn't take away the storm, it simply shifted my position within it. I was no longer being tossed around by the waves. I was learning how to float. There is a quiet strength in surrender that no amount of fighting can replicate. It's a strength rooted not in control but in trust. And trust, I discovered, is not something that comes naturally in the storm. It is something you practice. You practice it every time you release your need to know the outcome. You practice it every time you choose peace over panic. You practice it every time you decide that your worth is not tied to what you've lost, but to the resilience that remains inside you. Surrender is an invitation, and while it feels terrifying at first, it carries within it a profound kind of courage. It's the courage to let life unfold in ways you couldn't have scripted. It's the courage to stop fighting battles that were never yours to win. It's the courage to admit that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to stop resisting the storm and instead let it shape you in ways you never imagined. Rising from the rubble when a storm finally begins to pass, there is no triumphant fanfare to mark the moment. There is no clear announcement that the worst is over. More often, the shift is subtle, gradual, almost imperceptible. The winds lose some of their ferocity. The rain becomes a steady drizzle instead of a downpour. The ground is still soaked, the air still heavy, but you realize you can stand without being knocked over, and then you look around. That is when the reality of the rubble sets in. Rubble is not just the wreckage of what was destroyed. It is the evidence that something once stood there. It is the shattered pieces of a life you built, scattered across the landscape in ways that make it impossible to put back together exactly as it was. And that realization hurts. Because when you're standing in the rubble, your first instinct is to try to rebuild the old structure, to gather the fragments and reassemble them into the picture you once knew. But storms don't give us that option. They dismantle the past so thoroughly that it cannot be reconstructed. What they leave behind is the raw material for something entirely new. I remember my own after vividly. The storm that had consumed me eventually loosened its grip, and I found myself staring at what was left. The relationship I had poured years into was over. The sense of identity I had attached to it was gone. The routines, the plans, the quiet assumptions about what my future would look like, they all lay in pieces around me. It was disorienting. I no longer knew who I was supposed to be or what steps I was supposed to take. The temptation to cling to the old story was overwhelming. I wanted to pick up every fragment and force it back into place, to recreate what had been lost, because at least that story was familiar. But the truth was, I wasn't the same person anymore. The storm had changed me, and trying to rebuild my life into the shape it used to take would have been like trying to force myself back into clothes that no longer fit. The discomfort wasn't just external. It was internal. I had to accept that rising from the rubble meant starting fresh, even if that felt terrifying. The process didn't begin with grand gestures. It started with the smallest of choices. For me, it was creating routines that grounded me, waking up and walking outside before I touched my phone, choosing to feed myself nourishing meals even when I didn't feel like eating, giving myself permission to rest without labeling it as laziness. These small choices were bricks, and while one brick doesn't make a home, enough bricks laid consistently over time begin to form the foundation of something new. Friendships became another essential part of my rebuilding. There were people who had always been in my life, but who suddenly revealed themselves as anchors, showing up for me in ways that reminded me of the importance of connection. Their presence became part of my new structure. They reminded me that I didn't have to rise from the rubble alone. that rebuilding is often a communal act, not a solitary one. As I sorted through the debris of what was lost, I also discovered treasures I didn't expect. Strength I didn't know I had, a deeper sense of empathy for others in pain, creativity that emerged when I gave myself permission to explore new paths. The storm had not stripped me of everything. It had left behind qualities and lessons that I would never have cultivated otherwise. Those, too, became building blocks in my new life. The rubble is also a teacher in patience. Rising from it is not quick work. It is slow, deliberate, sometimes frustrating. There are days when progress feels invisible, when you look at the scattered pieces and wonder if anything meaningful could ever come from them. But if you keep choosing the next brick, the next act of courage, the next moment of self-compassion, you eventually notice that what once looked like chaos is beginning to take shape. One of the most powerful realizations for me was that rising from the rubble didn't just mean creating a new version of life. It meant creating a truer one. The storm had stripped away what was inauthentic, what I had been clinging to out of fear or obligation. And now, with the rubble spread out before me, I had the chance to choose what I wanted to carry forward and what I wanted to leave behind. It was not about recreating what was lost, but about imagining what was possible. The work of rebuilding is sacred because it is not just about putting pieces together. It is about rewriting your story from the ground up. You are not only rising from the rubble, you are being reborn within it. You are learning to walk again, to breathe again, to dream again. And while the storm may have left scars, those scars become part of the architecture of your new life. They don't diminish its beauty, they deepen it. Becoming the stormbreaker, surviving the storm changes you. It alters the way you see the world, the way you carry yourself, and the way you connect with others. The scars it leaves behind are not just reminders of pain. They are markers of resilience, proof that you endured what once felt impossible. And once you've walked through darkness and discovered your own capacity to rise again, you carry something inside of you that others desperately need, the ability to be a light in their storm. This is the moment when survival shifts into transformation, when you become not just someone who made it through, but someone who carries wisdom forward. The term stormbreaker came to me when I realized that storms themselves don't stop, at least not permanently. Life is a series of calm seasons interrupted by turbulence, and no matter how much we wish it, no matter how carefully we plan, storms will come again. But to become a stormbreaker is to face them differently. It's to recognize that you are no longer at the mercy of every gust of wind or crashing wave. You know what darkness feels like. You've practiced finding sparks of light, and you've learned the art of surrender. Rising from rubble has given you a strength that is not theoretical but lived, and because you have lived it, you can offer something real to others who are still in the midst of their storms. When I first began to share parts of my story, I hesitated. I worried about being too raw, too vulnerable, too exposed. There's a natural instinct to present the polished version of ourselves, the one that makes people believe we've got everything figured out. But what I discovered was that people didn't need the polished version. They needed the truth. They needed to hear that storms are devastating but survivable. They needed to know that healing doesn't happen all at once, and that it's okay if they're not over it yet. They needed honesty, not perfection. And in offering that, I realized that my pain had been transformed into purpose. Becoming a stormbreaker isn't about giving speeches or writing books. It's about the way you live your everyday life. It's about how you show up for the people around you when they are fragile. It's listening more than you speak, holding space without rushing someone to move on, reminding them through your presence that they are not alone. Sometimes being a stormbreaker is as simple as sitting quietly with someone in their grief, or as subtle as offering patience to a person who lashes out because they are hurting. It's the way your own scars give you empathy, making you softer rather than harder, making you more open rather than closed. One of the most profound shifts I experienced after my storm was realizing that resilience isn't just personal, it's communal. My healing became a thread that wove into the fabric of other people's healing. The strength I gained wasn't just for me, it was something I could pass on. When a friend called me late at night, sobbing because her own relationship had ended, I didn't have to scramble for words. I knew how to sit in the silence with her, how to remind her that the pain was real but not permanent. When a coworker shared that they were burned out and uncertain about their future, I could look them in the eye and say, with conviction, that storms don't define who you are but reveal what you're capable of becoming. This is what it means to be a stormbreaker. It is to walk into someone else's darkness carrying a lantern that says, "I've been here and I know there's a way through." You don't take away their storm, you can't. But you can show them that survival is possible, that growth is possible, that even in the wreckage, there is hope. And in offering that light, you reinforce it in yourself. Every time you remind someone else that they can rise, you strengthen your own belief in your ability to rise again too. There's also a personal transformation that happens once you step into this role. You stop seeing storms as things that only happen to you and begin to understand them as part of the human experience. This doesn't mean you welcome them or seek them out, but when they arrive, you face them with a steadiness that wasn't there before. You know that light can coexist with darkness. You know that surrender is a pathway to peace. You know that rubble can become raw material for something new. And because you've internalized those truths, storms no longer have the same power to undo you. What's remarkable about this shift is how it ripples outward. The way you live after the storm becomes a message without words. People notice when you carry yourself differently, when you speak with compassion born of lived experience, when you extend kindness in situations where others might respond with frustration. They may not know your story, but they can feel the depth you've gained, and in sensing that, they are reminded that depth is possible for them too. The identity of Stormbreaker isn't a title you choose. It's something that emerges naturally when you've walked through the fire and come out carrying embers of wisdom. It's the quiet authority that comes from scars that have healed. It's the unshakable compassion that arises when you know how it feels to be shattered. It's the steady presence that assures others that storms may come, but they do not have to destroy. Every storm leaves its mark. Some carve scars into the landscape of your life, reminders of what was lost and what was endured. Others plant seeds in the soil of your spirit, seeds that only grow because of the rain that once felt unbearable. No matter the form it takes, the storm changes you, and though the change may not be what you would have chosen, it becomes the story of who you are becoming. The journey through the onyx storm is not a straight line. It is heavy at first, pressing down on you with its weight, making you believe you'll never stand tall again. But even in that weight, there is shaping, chiseling, refining. Then comes the search for light. Those flickers that remind you that darkness is not absolute, that beauty can exist alongside sorrow. And as you find those sparks, you begin to practice surrender, loosening your grip on what cannot be controlled and discovering a freedom you never expected. When the winds finally die down, you are left with rubble. At first it looks like ruin, but slowly you realize it is also material, a collection of pieces that can be reimagined and rebuilt into something new. Brick by brick, choice by choice, you begin to rise again, not into the person you were but into someone more whole, more true, more alive. And from that rising, you gain not just resilience for yourself, but wisdom for others. You become the Stormbreaker, a steady presence in a world that will always have storms, someone who carries lanterns of hope into the darkness for those who have not yet found their way. What the onyx storm teaches us, above all, is that we are more resilient than we ever imagined. That light can be chosen even when darkness surrounds us. That surrender is not defeat, but a doorway. that rubble can become raw material for rebirth, and that the storms we survive are not wasted. They become the very things that allow us to walk alongside others with compassion, strength, and purpose. You are not defined by the storm that struck your life. You are defined by the way you endured it, by the way you chose to seek the light, by the way you rose from the rubble, and by the way you now carry wisdom in your scars. The onyx storm is not the end of your story. It is the transformation that shapes you into who you were always meant to be.